Good morning, everyone. Okay, I see we got a couple of people watching, so yeah, only 2 minutes past the official starting time. I am not always known for my great punctuality, but here we go. Book of Daniel, chapter 3. Please keep in mind what we learned last time. Book of Daniel, chapter 2. Okay, good morning, Batya. Good to see you and good to be seen. Glad we got some people watching. Good. 4, 5, 6. Yay. Okay, I'm just slightly clearing my throat. Don't worry, we're good. You can't catch anything over the internet, right? Keep in mind chapter 2. The statue in the king's dream, right? If you remember, the statue had 4 parts to it. 3 of metal and 1 was made of pottery. How many kingdoms will rise and fall before the ultimate rule of God's own nation, Israel, us? We're going to be revising the number. I'm sorry. We come to this type of text with preconceived notions. There are 4 kingdoms, and if you've done a little bit of reading around the subject of the book of Daniel, there's an enormous amount of things to be said in the less than religious viewpoint. There are 4 kingdoms and a number 4 and all that type of stuff. But in reality, we're going to see by the end of this this session that we're looking at 6 kingdoms. So don't worry. The chapter splits in 2. I've always done a little bit of an effort to try and figure out where the divisions are. So if you look at the source sheet, which I have open on my tablet here, I finally figured out the best way to do this is to have 2 computers open at the same time. So, right, the source sheet number 4, which is there on the Facebook page announcement of this class. It's also on the mailing that I sent out. There's another piece there as well. Take a look at your leisure at that particular article in Wikipedia about the number 6 and the number 60 in the history of mathematics, right? If you Rav Nachum Rabinovich Zatzal, who just passed away, my Rabbi going back many years. I learned with him together with Rabbi Sachs. So that's my yichus in learning for whatever it's worth. History of mathematics was his big thing, and the Jewish history of mathematics. That was his PhD dissertation. In any event, excuse me, the number 6 and the number 60 is something that we're going to look at. And in a nutshell, Babylon, the Sumerians before them, operated on a base of 60. Unlike what we have, base 10, or previously we did things in dozens, right? Choirs, reams, all these sort of different numbers that we had in history from the imperial system. The Babylonians operated in 6s and in 60. So what we need to do is just keep that in mind, that this is an important fundamental thing, because you're going to see in the very beginning, verse number 1, that this is what he's going to be talking about. So the statue is the first part, and we're going to look at the what and the why. What was it and why? And we're going to talk about whether this is an idol that needs to be worshipped or it's magic. I don't have a better word for this yet. The term that I want to use and the discussion of the nature of this statue splits down the middle. We're going to go to the original source on this. It was a non-religion specific manipulation of the cosmos. Come up with an acronym for that, or put it into much more our sort of terms. Focus everything on this picture of the future. Here is the way I, King Nebuchadnezzar, want the future to be. The future is going to be Babylon. It's going to be gold. It's going to be my descendants ruling forever. Okay? This is what we're going to focus on. Part 2 is the 3 Jews in the court of the king are denounced for not bowing to the idol. They survived the furnace. This is martyrdom. This is a big source for Jewish martyrdom requirements. The last 3 verses belong to the next chapter. Okay, so I'm intentionally focusing on the statue and off the fiery furnace thing. Of course, the paradigm for martyrdom, and there are practical applications in Jewish law for all of us over the years. Today, thank God, we're in a world where we're not called upon to martyr ourselves, to give up our lives. But nonetheless, it's a very significant discussion in the Gemara, in the Tosafot we're going to be looking at, and it all starts around here. We meet an angel. The angel is described as Bar Elahin, the child of God, the son of God. There are obvious connotations for that we're not interested in, but we'll take a quick look at that. And then the fact that Daniel is not here. Daniel is not here at all. Okay? Daniel is not here. I'm going to take care of one tiny technical issue. I've taken care of it. Good. It's a wonderful world. Look at the source sheet. I've tried to do some chapter headings, and you should have also a connection, a link to Daniel chapter 3 with Rashi's commentary in English. That's taken from the excellent website of Chabad.org, including Rashi. But I'm looking at the Art Scroll edition of Daniel, and I don't knock Art Scroll. I don't praise it greatly. One way or the other, it does provide an amazing service in giving us the text very, very clearly set in English. Okay, chapter 1. No, this is chapter 3, verse number 1 of chapter 3. We are not going to read much of the Hebrew. We're going to come back in a minute and look at a little bit of the Hebrew, or rather Aramaic, but not a lot of it. It's difficult. It's very difficult. But we don't need to. We're not studying biblical Aramaic, right? King Nebuchadnezzar made a statue of gold. Its head 60 cubits, and its width 6 cubits. 60 and 6 were the fundamental numbers of Babylon. The Al-Shich, Rav Moshe Al-Shich, understands the 60 cubits to symbolize the primary epochs in the history of mankind. I'm reading straight out of the summary of the Art Scroll text here. The very last source on the source sheet is Al-Shich. I spent a lot of time reading Al-Shich, an enormous amount of time. It's very, very long, and largely Malbim, which is going to be the next to last source that we have here. Largely Malbim summarizes what he says. But the piece that Al-Shich brings out is the 60 cubits, the number 6, are fundamental numbers in Babylonian life, thinking, mathematics, and obviously also astrology and wizardry. So we're looking at now 6 kingdoms. There's going to be a total of 5 kingdoms, and the 6th one is, well, let's go through it. If you remember from last time, gold, silver, copper, iron, pottery. The iron and pottery, the 4 and the 5, exist at the same time. And then there's the rock, capital R, which represents the nation of Israel, with God backing us up. Okay, so the 6 represents, now very, very obviously, this is not an idol in my opinion. The Art Scroll in the comments here and in the introduction, very, very well worth reading, very inspirational stuff. They are focusing on the classic Jewish reading of this text, which is a martyrdom inspiration story. There are times in history when this is something that unfortunately we have had to do over and over again. And Jews have gone to their deaths rather than transgress tenets of our beliefs. The other side of the opinion and spectrum is that it's not an idol at all, that it's something magical that the king is doing. So let's continue reading. The 6 and the 60 is the significant. Take a look in the history of mathematics about all of this. Okay, so it's 60 cubits high, its width is 6 cubits. It stood in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylonia. Malvin is going to explain this. We're going to take a look at this in a couple of minutes. Dura is a historical place of negative spiritual energy. It's a wizardy place. And if you remember back to Sefer Bereshit, the book of Genesis, the Tower of Babel, that's where it is. That's where that is. King Nebuchadnezzar set to assemble the satraps, nobles, governors, judges, treasurers, advisors, guards, and all the provincial officials to come to the dedication of the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. There's a whole bunch of different levels of officials here, right? And we're also going to have, we met previously, different levels and types of wizards and magicians, right? So this is largely not our interest, what they are. The commentaries are quite interesting and all across the board in what they are and were. Necromancers, people who go to graveyards and get inspiration from impure spirits there. Wizards, magicians, and astrologers. My friends, the astrologers. The rulers, nobles, governors, this is verse number 3, the treasurers, the judges, the advisors, etc., gathered together for the dedication of the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood facing the statue. A herald decreed, "It is commanded to you, O peoples, nations, and languages." We're looking here at a very, very big ceremony, the United Nations of the day. United, of course, under the rulership and under the thumb and boot of King Nebuchadnezzar. He controlled the known world at the time. When you hear the sound of the horn, the whistle, the tambourine, the drum, the cymbal, all kinds of music, you shall fall and prostrate yourselves to the golden statue that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. There are different types of musical instruments. There are different types of wizards and astrologers, and some of them are in some of the verses they're listed, and one or two are missing later on, and there is explanation of it all. But again, this is largely not of great interest to us. But we'll continue in the text, because the point is to get the picture here and to see what this picture is really all about. Verse number 6, whoever does not fall and prostrate himself will immediately be thrown into a fiery, burning furnace. Something like a lime kiln. That's something I can associate with, and that's something I saw in one of the English commentaries I was looking at. We think of a furnace that we have in the basement of our house to heat the water and heat the heating, but here this is dug into the ground. You could climb up to it, walked up an incline to it, and lime was prepared in this in some way or other. And people were thrown into this. This was the punishment. Therefore, as soon as the people heard the sound of the horn, the whistle, the tambourine, the drum, all of these musical instruments, all the people, the nations, in other words, the representatives of the nations that Nebuchadnezzar had conquered, all the people who spoke different languages fell and prostrated themselves to the golden statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Okay. Let's go to the source sheet, because that is basically the story, and the rest of the chapter is telling us about the resistance of the 3 young men to this edict. Okay. Source number 1. Again, chapter 3, verse 1. We're going to take a close look at a couple of these lines, and I'm going to try and not burden you with too much of the difficulties of the language here, but it is important to get these words very, very clear. Daniel chapter 3, verse 1 says, King Nebuchadnezzar made a statue of gold 60 cubits high, 6 cubits broad. The number is going to be significant. Keep it in mind. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. There is history here. If you have time later on, go look up the Tower of Babel story. And also, it is a place where the victims, the dead bodies that were drowned in the flood of Noah, they accumulated there as well. So it's a place of great significance in terms of history, and there is negative energy imbued into the ground there. Zipping ahead, this is verse number 3. When you hear the sound of all of these instruments, I honestly doubt that they had bagpipes back in those days. We're looking at roughly the year 600 BCE, according to the Jewish readings of this, according to the so-called scientific readings of this. The book of Daniel is written about 400 years later, in the year 200 or so, and it's from around the time of Hanukkah, which makes a certain amount of sense. But what I see is the text as we have it, fudging over the details and not giving us a precise date. But that's again, we're here to learn basic points. We're here to get the pictures. When you hear all of these instruments fall down and worship the statue of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up, I've highlighted the terms that we need to keep in mind. Third line in the Hebrew text of number 3, tiplun v'tisgedun. It looks like a couple of words that are totally impossible to figure out because they're Aramaic. Don't be frightened by Aramaic. It does not bite. It's a dead language, although people actually do speak it. In some parts of Turkey, I believe people speak Aramaic to this day. Tiny, tiny bit of grammar. Tiplun is, in Hebrew, tiplu, nafal, to fall, to serve, to worship, revere, right? If I trip and fall, I nafalti, I fell, I need no fail, right? That is that same word, it just has a more Aramaic formulation here in the verse. People are required to fall. Plach is to pay reverence to. Pei lamed chet. It's not used here in this verse, but it does come a bit later on in the chapter. Pay reverence to. Right? Pulchana nuchra'a. If you remember the long Kaddish that you say at the end of learning your Masechta or at a funeral, we say to Hashem, we say to God, remove pulchana nuchra'a, remove foreign worship and reverence from our land. Pei lamed lamed, pilel, as in hit palel. I am praying, ani mit palel. That is not used here. That is a word that is not here. Do not confuse this, do not bring this one in. The word that is used in Aramaic is sigad, tiskidun, samach gimel dalad. It does come up in some of the Aramaic tefillot and some of the Aramaic prayers that we have. Tisagidne kameu kame. It's in Brich Shemei when we open up the ark and take out the Torah scrolls. We pray and bow and worship. We're going to see that there is a difference between these words, and that the text and that what Nebuchadnezzar is requiring is probably not worship of the statue. I'm going to come down very, very strongly in the camp of opinion number 1 that we're going to see here. Tosafot on Pesachim. Deep breath here. We're not here in a Gemara shir, right? We're going to be learning a little bit of Tosafot, largely to get the source that all the other commentaries take as the base of what they're saying. We're going to look at Malbim. We may, if we have time, look at Al-Shech, which is the last one here. But let's read this Tosafos. I have it in English as well. The English text comes from dafyomi.com, .yomi.org, one of these things, and it's a point-by-point analysis of the Tosafot. You know who the Baalei Tosafot were. The Tosafists, they're called in English. They are the additional layer of commentary and discussion of the Talmud. And if you open a standard Gemara page, on one side is Rashi, the other side is the Tosafot. There are many Tosafis, there are many Baalei Tosafot, and their discussions are recorded. They're often quite difficult, and so not everybody learns it. But here in the Gemara and Pesachim, there is a very brief mention of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, which is what we're going to come up to next. The three men without Daniel. Daniel is somewhere else, right? Daniel is somewhere else. And we're going to see that Midrash tells us Daniel probably considered this to be an idolatrous worship event and ran away and consulted with the prophet Ezekiel, who was alive at the time. Let's take a look here, because this is very, very, very important. Mara'u Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. What is it that these three men saw? Why did they give their life? What did they see here in this particular circumstance that they said, we are going to martyr ourselves? And Midrash tells us they went and asked Daniel, they went and asked the prophet Ezekiel, and God says to Ezekiel, this is a test for them. These three men have to go into the furnace without a promise of divine help. They have to go entirely on their own faith. And that's what Ezekiel tells them, that God says, you're not going to get any help. Go anyway. And they do. They go. They throw themselves into the furnace. And we see this in the text. We see this later on in the text there. And then God and Daniel have another conversation, and Ezekiel speaks up as well, and he says, God, how can you do this? How can you not promise these men that they'll be saved? And God says, of course I'm going to save them. I'm not going to let my children die. But they have to show real faith. Okay, so what did they see? What was the situation that was there in front of them? Piresha Kuntres. Let's try and say in the English, because it's going to be a little bit easier to deal with. Rashi explains, and Tosafos rejects this. What did they see? That they did not explain V'chai Bahem, the well-known line from the Torah, that you're supposed to live according to the ways of the Torah, and not that you should die from them. Okay? This is the translation just lifted directly from the point-by-point Tosafos page. Tosafos disagrees with it. Question. Seeing this took place in public, Bifar Hesia, right? Remember when the Baalei Tosafot lived. The Rabbeinu Tam, who's going to start explaining here in a moment, Rabbeinu Tam is the grandson of Rashi. They lived in the 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th centuries, right? 11th through 13th centuries, in Western Europe, the time of the Crusades. Martyrdom issues, Jews being forced to convert or die. This was halacha l'maisa for them. This was something that was a daily occurrence in their world. So it's very, very important for them to deal with this. It took place in public. And the Gemara in Sanhedrin says that according to absolutely everyone, one is obligated to give up one's life even for a small mitzvah. That is the discussion, that is the end of that Gemara there. If the non-Jewish authorities, the people with the swords and the spears, are saying to you, transgress this small mitzvah, we're not talking about idolatry even, and it's a public forum, you're taken into the town square, and you're asked to, whatever it is, eat a piece of treif, I'm sorry. This is it. You have to take the unpleasant alternative. So Rabbeinu Tam therefore explains that the image that Nebuchadnezzar made was not Avodah Zarah at all, but a bust, a statue that he had made in his own honor. This is a nuance that you need to be aware of. The Rabbeinu Tam in the Tosfos says he made the statue to his own honor, and Anderata. For some reason, it's a hard word to say. Anderata or Inderata, a statue that he made lichvod atzmo, for his own honor. So that's the question of the Talmud. That's what the issue is. So then, why did they go and do this? Right? So you've got this basic opinion here. We're not going to spend a lot of time analyzing the Tosfos here, or the Gemara, but the sources here, right? They find support for this. Rabbeinu Tam finds support for this in the verse in Daniel, where just a little bit later on in our chapter, to your God we will not pray, and to your golden image we will not prostrate ourselves, implying that Nebuchadnezzar's God and the image were two different things. It does seem to hold like that. If you are familiar with, and of course you're familiar with, biblical text, there is a very strong tendency to repeat, right? There is a lot of repetition, and the repetition is done for emphasis, is done for poetic effect. Something is described as good, and something is described as very good. Things are repeated. So you could indeed say that we're talking about one and the same thing, but Rabbeinu Tam in the Tosfos is saying, no, we're not talking about an idol here. And then we have the Rabbi Yitzchak explains that they should have actually fled, just as Daniel did. There are twists and turns here in the Tosfos, but I want you to get the basic thought out of this here, and that is very, very simply. Excuse me 1 second. That there is the opinion that this was not an idolatrous item at all, and is in fact a magical thing that Nebuchadnezzar was doing. The Tosfos is saying that he did this statue for his own honor and kavod, his glory, or else Rabbeinu Yitzchak says it is an object of idolatrous worship, which is the conclusion of the ArtScroll commentary, and that is certainly the classic Jewish way of looking at it. Look at text number 5. We're still on the same verse. Verse 1 of chapter 3. I didn't have a translation of Malbim, but we're going to read through at least some of this, and then we'll get back to the story. Right? Top line in Malbim, source number 5. Why did he make this statue? What purpose? B'hotza'a rabbah kazu. It cost a fortune. Right? Metals were much more valuable than they are today, much less common. Right? All of us have a little bit of gold in some form or of another, but it was much more uncommon and much more valuable. And this was a lot of gold, 60 cubits high, 6 cubits across. Why did he get all the officials of his kingdom together in this particular place to bow to the idol? Right? Now, just a minute. Remember the last chapter. The king saw a statue like this, made of 4 different metals, and in the end acknowledges the God of Israel. Obvious question, but no one else is asking it. At the end of chapter 2, King Nebuchadnezzar acknowledges the God of Israel, the God of Daniel, who gave the interpretation of his dream. So why is he making an idol to worship? He's just converted to Judaism in the last chapter, or if not converted, become a Philo-Semite at the very least, right? A lover of things Jewish. Next paragraph. He made this really big, 60 high, 6 wide. Reading in Malbim. Rav Sadia Gaon has explained, and after him Hasar Mahariah. Took me a while to figure out who Mahariah is. It's Rav Yitzchak Abarbanel. And what he wanted to do by making this statue, Liz Levatel Bazeh Horaat HaChalom. What happened in the dream? What happened in the interpretation of the dream? Only the top of the statue, the head, was gold. Only right now, Babylon is pure gold. Inferior kingdoms will follow, and then they will all be destroyed. This was the future that was predicted for him by God through the dream, as interpreted by Daniel in chapter 2. He wanted to destroy that. He didn't want that. He was a king. He wanted to stay king. He wanted his children and grandchildren to be kings after him. He got the message, Ki necharatz me'ashamayim. that it is decreed, completely certain from heaven, that after the golden head, which is him, there'll be a kingdom of silver, then a kingdom of copper, and a kingdom of bronze, and many, many kings. He made a pesel, a poel. He made a statue, domeh betavnito, similar, comparable to the one in the dream. Rak shayakulo mizahav, it was all of gold. Don't let this detail pass by. There's so many other things in this chapter that we can talk about, but this is the key one that I want to focus on. He made this statue entirely of gold. Right, the bold print in the middle there. Ki'ilu kulam mekablim alehem biratzon et malchut hazahav. What he wanted to achieve was that everyone, all the kingdoms that he had conquered, all the nations of the world, would receive upon themselves, they would accept, biratzon, with their will, the kingdom of gold. Babylon rules forever. Shia kayam ledor vador, that the kingdom of Babylon will rule and continue to exist forever and ever, v'lo ya'avor, and never pass away. Right? So we have Tosfos and we have Rabbeinu Tam saying it was kavod for himself, and here we're getting to a bit more of the detail of what this is all about. This opinion comes directly from Tosafot, there from Rabbeinu Tam. V'haya bazeh gamkein maaseh telemasaot. And a very, very odd word. It's actually not in the dictionaries. But I asked my friend Rabbi Avraham Sutton, and he said, of course you know the word. It is talisman. The common expression today that we have a talisman, right? Talisman, and you can see how the letters are interchanged here. The king invoked talismans, the inyanei kesem, magic, v'nichush, and divination, according to how they used to think in those days. They thought that with doing this sort of thing, they could livatel horaot shemaimiot. They would be able to annul decrees from heaven and to change them. It wasn't just a statue. It was a statue made with magic. It was a statue imbued with talismans, omens, all sorts of magical things that they firmly believed in those days. Right? If you want to put it into our sort of terminology, they made a focus. They looked ahead. The king tried to picture what his perfect kingdom would be like, a kingdom that would last forever and ever. Right? Thus it had to be all gold, and there is no mention of all the other metals. So it would be that the kingdom of gold, i.e. Babylon, would take over all the nations of the world. And that's why it is 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide. Like the measurements of the dream. And if you remember also, Vehekitz as well, when Daniel was interpreting the dream, King Nebuchadnezzar saw this image in front of him with his eyes open while he was wide awake. And they put it in the valley of Dura. And the rabbis tell us in Midrash and in Talmud that is the very same place where the Dor HaFlaga, where the generation of those who wanted to build a tower to fight against heaven, they went there and did this, Tower of Babel. This is a little bit extra reading, you should go look this up. Interesting story right at the beginning of Breshit. Everybody spoke the same language. They decided to build a tower. Why? Their intention was also lakim lemalchut atzuma, to have a powerful kingdom for themselves that would be eternal, and again to defeat divine instructions for the world, and to fight and, if possible, defeat God. So this was a place where this was tried before. He picked this place. It was misugal. It was set aside. It was magically endowed, but obviously not good magic at all. Okay? We're going to not take a leave, I think, on the Chavatzelet HaSharon of of the Alshich, or Moshe Alshich, 16th century, died in 1593, he's buried up in Tzfat. He is largely saying what we just got from Malbim. He has a couple of more details that we may zip back into if we have a little bit of time. Okay? This is the statue. This is what King Nebuchadnezzar was doing. It was not, in my opinion, and certainly Malbim, certainly Alshich, certainly opinion number one in Tosafot, this is a magical activity to try and have his kingdom exist in perpetuity. That's the piece that we ignore, but we should not. And the purpose of this whole series is to get the visions and the pictures clear in our mind, because here we are seeing the kingdom of 4 rising in number to become a kingdom of 6, and the 6 and the 60 in the statue connect to that. His 6, his 60 is all gold, all Babylon, all the time, through the end of history. Okay? Now comes a story that we're very familiar with. The continuation, which is chapter 3, verse number 8. At the very same time, we're back in the English text, and if you're following on Chabad.org's page there, you will see that he has Rashi there, and Rashi has some interesting things to say. Some very, very interesting terminology is here used, and various kinds of instruments and musical instruments. Some Chaldean men came and defamed the Jews. They exclaimed and said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "May the king live forever. You, O king, issued a decree that every person who hears the sound of all of these musical instruments," and here in my Art Scroll translation we don't have a bagpipe, but in the one from Sefaria we do. Some of them are recognizable, some are not. And if you look at the text, you'll see some of them are familiar. Psanterin, psanter is a piano in contemporary Hebrew. Suponia, which should of course sound familiar. But we really don't know what these instruments were mostly. Whoever does not fall and prostrate himself is to be thrown into a fiery burning furnace. There are Jewish men whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylonia. And the names are given in their Babylonian names: Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. We know them as Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. These men have not accepted your decree upon themselves, O king. Your God they do not worship, and to the golden statue you have set up, they do not prostrate themselves. Right, here's where we get the slightly different terminology. To your God, leilahach, la falchin, right, palach, they do not worship. Uletzelem de dahava, and to the image of gold, la sagidin, they do not bow themselves down. Again, I am going to follow the way I'm looking at this, that these are two completely separate issues. That we're okay, says these people, with the Jews, and specifically these 3 men, not worshiping your God, because the God of Israel, the Israelites have a special protected status in the court of Nebuchadnezzar, right? Daniel is one of his advisors. Where's Daniel right now? And the thought in Midrash seems to be that, number one, either Daniel held a very high position and didn't have to be there. He was a privileged courtier. Or else he believed it was idolatry and ran away. So that's why we're able to have this sort of discussion. What were they doing? Is this idolatry? Is this not idolatry? So it does seem to be, if you say that we are not looking at a duplication, and none of the commentaries are actually saying that these 2 expressions are the same thing in different words, but that bowing to your God, not required of the Jews. Bowing to the statue, required of everyone. Right, so King Nebuchadnezzar is not happy. And in verse 13, he is angry. He is in a fury, right? Is it true, he said, that these men, to them, that you do not worship my God, that you do not prostrate yourselves to the golden statue that I have set up? Behold, he's giving them a warning. These are three men who are in the service of the king. He knows them already. And they're useful people to him. He doesn't want them to be thrown into the furnace immediately. Behold, you must be prepared when you hear all these musical instruments to fall and prostrate to the statue that I have made. Right? Tiplun v'tiskedun. Fall down and worship to the statue that I have made. And if you do not, you will be thrown into the burning furnace. And who is the God that can save you from my hands? Right? An extremely powerful king. And has the power of life and death. They responded, and they said to the king, Nebuchadnezzar, we are not worried about replying to you about this matter. Behold, our God whom we worship is able to save us. He will rescue from the fiery burning furnace and from your hand, O king. But if he does not, if God lets us die in here, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not worship your God, and to the golden statue that you have set up, we do not prostrate ourselves. Right? And that goes back to the thing that we alluded to before about Daniel and Ezekiel talking to God and bringing the message back, that they had to go in with complete faith and accept the martyrdom should it come. Nebuchadnezzar is very, very angry, verse number 19. And the form of his face became contorted. Right? He got red in the face. He was angry. And he exclaimed and commanded to heat the furnace 7 times more than it was normally heated. Not good. Not good. Hannah is asking what's the significance of listing all the different instruments. There is some amount of commentary on the significance when one is missing and others are listed. I don't see an enormous amount of significance in listing them all. It does seem that they like the lists. It's impressive. Or else this is a note from the court records of the time that it adds to the prestige of the events that there are so many things. There is, and if we have time at some later date, we could get into all of the lists, what they were. There are 3 sets of lists. One is the musical instruments. 2 is the officials of the kingdom. There are different layers of officials, and number 3 is the different types of wizards. Right, so it's a technical sort of issue. What do the Babylonian Aramaic words mean? What were these things in antiquity? What is a word that we can use for today? 7 times hotter. 7 is a magical number. 7 as a magical number dates to the Shiva Kochvei Lechet. If you're familiar a little bit with classical astrology, there are 7 visible planets. If you look up at the sky tonight, just around sunset towards the west, you'll see Venus and Mercury, which are 2 of the planets. They believe them to be stars that could move. There were 7 classical planets, what they call Kochvei Lechet, stars that move. And from that, the number 7 became very significant. Right? Also, obviously, you look into 7 days of creation. 7 is a magical number. 7 is a magical number, and it's related to the 7 classical planets. Okay? They heated the furnace 7 times hotter, and he commanded to the strong men of his guard to bind these 3 and throw them into the fiery burning furnace. These men were bound in their cloaks, their pants, their robes, and other clothing, and were thrown into the fiery burning furnace. There are places and times where lists are just liked. Some people like lists. I like making lists, but I don't always do what I have on my list of things to do. But here, certainly in the Daniel, Ezra, Nehemiah genre, all of these are full of lists of things. Because of the king's peremptory command, machzafah, the word of the king was quick. He said, "Get this done right now." The furnace was overheated. The men who carried our Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were killed by the flames. The soldiers that were taking them to be thrown into the furnace were themselves killed. And our three heroes, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, fell tied up into the fiery burning furnace. So apparently this is the lime kiln sort of picture, where you can walk up to it, and they were brought to the edge, but the soldiers taking them were consumed by the heat. They were killed, and then our three heroes just fell in. What happens next? Nebuchadnezzar was bewildered. Kam behit bahala. He was mevulbal. Bahala is haste, sorry. He was confused, and he stood up in haste. He spoke to his ministers and said, "Did we not throw 3 bound men into the fire?" They exclaimed and said, "This is true, O king." He said, "Behold, I see 4 men walking in the fire, and there is no wound on them." The appearance of the 4th one is like an angel. Bar Elahin, right? The son of God or gods. It's not an entirely comfortable word for us Jews, but the terminology is actually explained. It's in Eov, it's in Job, it's also much earlier on in Bereshit, B'nai Elohim, children of God. Mitzudot, the Baal Mitzudot says, Kei Nikra Hamalach, this is what an angel is called, Ki ilu hu mi b'nei bayit shel hashechina. Right, we use the term today, if someone is at home in your house, he is a ben bayis, he is one of the family. So the angels are referred to as children of God because they're at home up there in heaven. God doesn't have children, obviously, right? In the literal sense. Rashi brings up the issue of Nebuchadnezzar saying, "Wait a minute, I recognize this. There are 3 human beings and there is 1 angel, just like the angel I saw in Yeshayahu chapter 37, Isaiah 37. Nebuchadnezzar was there with Sancheiriv when he laid siege to Jerusalem, and the camp of Assyria, the army, was destroyed and decimated by an angel. He's seen an angel before, so he recognizes it. Right? Nothing's happening to them. They're walking about unharmed. Midrash tells us that this was the angel Uriel. Right? Again, Midrash Talmud has all of this, that the angel in charge of hailstones came to God and said, "Quick, send me there. I can put the fire out." But that wouldn't have been enough of a miracle. Rabbi Tzadok has quite a discussion of this, that it needs to be a miracle within a miracle. A sudden hailstorm would not have been such a great miracle. I mean, it would have been a miracle, but it wouldn't have been so great. What happened was the angel Uriel went, and Uriel is in charge of fire. So the angel Uriel goes. That's who the king saw. That's who was there in the furnace with them. He fixed the fire. He said to the fire, which is his element that he has dominion over, "Remain a fire, but don't burn. Don't burn people." And that's an even greater miracle. This comes up in Reb Tzadok HaKohen Chasidus. That's a different class, a different subject altogether. Right, so Nebuchadnezzar approached the opening of the furnace. He got as close as he could. He said, "Servants of the supreme God, step out and come here." Again, we're getting to a very similar ending to what we had with chapter 2, and that's going to be again in chapter 4, where Nebuchadnezzar the king acknowledges the God of Israel. Right? And if we're looking for parallels for things in our time and for end days, this is an overlooked one, but not so much, that those who try to harm us will eventually proclaim loud and clear, the God of Israel is the true God, the Jews are his chosen people, Torah is the right way, and we were wrong to do these bad things to the Jews. Right? They stepped out of the fire. The king said, "Come here." They stepped out, and all the various ministers and officials saw the men over whose bodies the fire had no effect. The hair of their head was not singed, their cloaks were unharmed, and they had not even absorbed the smell of fire. Right? Daniel is not here, and it is an open question. And one of the things that we talked about the very first time was the parallel nature of the texts and the stories. Daniel in the lion's den, which is chapter 7, I think. But look forward if you have time, and we all still have time on our hands, right? Look at the Daniel in the lion's den. It's a very similar type of story. Daniel goes into a place where he should have been ripped to pieces by the lions, but they recognize in Daniel that he is from Yehudah, from Judah, whose symbol is the lion, that he is of the royal family, and they are the royal beasts, etc., and they don't harm him at all. Just like the fire doesn't harm our heroes here. Nebuchadnezzar exclaimed and said, "Blessed is the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego." He's referring to them by their Babylonian names. "God sent his angel and saved his servants who relied on him and disobeyed the king's order, my order, offered their bodies in order not to worship or prostrate themselves to any god other than their God." Right? This line particularly doesn't fit with the picture of the statue not being an idol. No reading of this text is perfect. Right? I issue a decree. Any people, nation, or language who will speak amiss, a lovely word, who will speak amiss, who will have something negative to say about the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they shall be cut to pieces, and his house will be turned into a dunghill, for there is no other God able to rescue in this manner. Then the king promoted them in the province of Babylonia. And that's where the story ends. Back to the issue of all of the different types of things. Here's one of the cases where the different categories are enumerated and some are missing. And we've got a commentary, or we've got a Gemara that is actually going to start to explain some of that. In verse number 27 here, we see that the satraps, nobles, governors, etc., 27. Yeah. They are missing categories. There are some who are not there. Yeah, it's Rashi. It's Rashi on verse 26, 27. If you have the Chabad.org page open, you can see it for yourselves. 4 nations are counted above that are not counted here. Right? What the issue is, they were the ones who were consumed by fire, and Malbim then goes on and makes the conjecture, but it seems reasonable, that these 4 missing categories were the priests of the fire cult that was widespread in Egypt, and then their death is figurative. Right? Think back to what's happening. There's several men are there in uniform with their swords, etc., and they are pushing the three heroes into the furnace of fire. They are killed by the fire. Why are they not here? Why are they mentioned previously, right? What Malbim is saying is that there was fire worship in Egypt, and obviously here is the worship of fire being denied and desecrated and put into a place of disbelief. They were the priests. They were the people who worshipped the fire. They got out of there very quickly because their God was declared and shown to be of no power and value, or at the very least subject to the more powerful, all-ruling God of Israel. They died of embarrassment. And indeed, Malbim goes on to say these people actually fell on their swords. Right? If you look to the end here, at the end of verse 30, you do have a break in the Masoretic text, and verse 31 continues. We've talked about this before, that there is a traditional division that we look to as Jews, and that is the paragraphs that are either an open paragraph or a closed paragraph. There's a space of a number of letters here between Medinat Bavel, end of verse 30, and Nebuchadnezzar Malka, beginning of verse 31. These are traditional to us. These go back very, very far in time. The division into chapters dates from the 12th, 13th century. It is Christian in origin. I linked on the source sheet a very short article on Chabad.org about this. There is room to say that some of these divisions are actually malicious and intended to upset and damage a classic Jewish reading of the text. Right? Obviously, you have this to a great degree with the Christian translations, that they are obviously there to have their reading of our Bible and to push aside our reading of our Bible in the simplest of terms, without trying to antagonize anybody on the subject. We had this a lot when we were looking at Isaiah and Psalms in terms of the Greek and Latin translations. This is a course we did at Shir Chadash a while back. The next piece is a letter from King Nebuchadnezzar to all the peoples and nations. He writes this enormous letter, which goes on through to the end of chapter 4, and that is where we are going to be picking up next time. It is the madness of Nebuchadnezzar, right? He imagines himself to be some sort of animal. He has a vision. He goes out, lives in the forest, and comes back. Very, very, very peculiar imagery. But read ahead if you possibly can, because this is worth looking at and worth looking up. And it's another one of the pictures and the dreams that is the focus of this particular series of classes. Okay, I want to thank you for your time, attention. We're just on the 60-minute mark, and I do not always begin on time, but I firmly believe in ending on time. That is a very important rule. We all have things to do. Thank you for your time, for your attention. There are a lot more classes in the course of the week on the Facebook page of Kilat Shir Chadash. Also on Zoom. Please look at our website and our Facebook page for all of these details. If you are not on my mailing list for classes, send me a message in Facebook here, Facebook message, and I'll put you on the mailing list, because I do tend to send out at least a day or so beforehand all of the texts. Thank you for your thanks, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate your time, your concentration, We're now exactly on the 1 hour point. Have a wonderful day. I want to wish you a happy, healthy Chag. Chag Shavuot is coming up. Eat lots of cheesecake, folks. One of the better things in life. Chag Sameach, Shabbat Shalom. And please spend a little bit of time reading ahead the next chapter, because there's a lot in it. It's very, very dense, and we need to be able to have all of this sink in. Okay, so same time, same station, 11 o'clock, Tuesday morning of next week. Thank you.